Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of A Double Feature. This week being Classic Film Week, we're taking a look at arguably one of, if not the, greatest film in the world of cinema. That film, of course, being Citizen Kane. If you haven't seen it, please stop what you're doing and go watch it, because it absolutely is a must-watch.
And then come back.
Yes, and then come back. But that being said, hopefully you watched it, you're back, and we're going to talk. So, Derek, my first question for you. You focus more on sort of the what am I trying to say? Sort of the reason for its longevity in this kind of number one or top 10 spot of best films ever made, being that it was extremely innovative and really raised the bar for filmmakers in general. Now, that being said, I agree with you on that notion, and I would also even go as far as to say that there are milestone films, films that, again, continue moving us to the next level from a filmmaking perspective, not necessarily a story perspective, a filmmaking perspective. And I was just curious. I mean, obviously I have my films of what I think do that, but I was curious if you had films off the top of your head that you felt like were the landmark films.
Oh, sure. For different things, I would put for landmark films, such films like 2001 Space Odyssey. I'd put in The Godfather. I'd put in Jaws.
Yes.
Schindler's List. Probably Lord of the Rings.
Yes, I would definitely put Lord of the Rings in there.
Maybe On the Waterfront.
Oh yeah, okay. I didn't even think about that one.
I mean, I'm sure if I thought about it a little bit more, I could come up with a few other touchstone films, but, off the top of my head, there we go. Oh, Stagecoach. I'd put Stagecoach in there as well. But anyway, yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I would have added Star Wars, of course. I also would have added Toy Story.
Oh, sure.
And I guess for that matter, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't even think of animated, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then I would even go as far as to say that Avatar was... That might be pushing it a little bit, but... Oh, and I would say the most recent of the milestone films would be Gravity.
Yeah, well...
I feel like that is a cinematic achievement worth praising over and over again.
Yeah. I'd say if it came down to choosing between Avatar or Gravity, I'd pick Gravity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's not really.
That was just incredible. Yeah. And also my sort of another question I had was, and again, this was more of a film history perspective sort of question I had, but I mean, before Citizen Kane, my understanding was film was sort of this joke of an art form. I don't think it was taken as seriously as it was until post-Citizen Kane.
No, I think you're right there. It wasn't taken as seriously, yeah. I can get behind that statement. But I don't know if I would call it a joke of an art form, if nothing else just because in the 1930s, film was wildly popular.
Okay, Derek, so here's another question for you.
All right.
So let's say some of our viewers just saw Citizen Kane and they thought, okay, Yeah, it was a little slow, and the beginning was a little like, what the flip is going on? But, and I'm referring to the part where they show the trailer, but you don't know it's a trailer till about 10 minutes after.
The news
You're
reel.
like, what is this? Anyways, let's say, can you recommend other films that our viewers might be interested in, that with maybe they're interested in some more of these kind of iconic films that are very similar to Citizen Kane and they want more? What would you recommend to them?
Well, I don't know if it's similar, but iconic, sure. So for the past 50 years, two movies have really been battling it out in the industrial magazine Sight and Sound for the number 1 and number 2 spot. Because what they do is the magazine Sight and Sound, or the journal Sight and Sound, every 10 years they go to all of the critics and producers and directors in the movie industry and say, what are the top 10 greatest films ever. Citizen Kane was the number 1 spot for about 50 years, but just this last go around, it was bumped down to number 2. And the number 2 film has now taken the number 1 spot. And so if anything, I would recommend this other film, which is Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo.
Really?
Now,
that surprises me.
I would do it not because the films are necessarily similar, because they're not. They're very, very different. However, just the compare and contrast in styles and whatever. So we're having, on the one hand, Citizen Kane, which, as we just talked about, Orwell is coming in. He's never done a film before. He's making everything up
right
as he's going. He's hitting it out of the park completely for something that's just new and really establishing a whole bunch of stuff. Hitchcock, on the other hand, he's an old veteran. He started working in the silent era, and Vertigo is now, he's at some of his most popular films, going through the 40s, 50s, and up into the 60s. And his approach is almost a polar opposite of Kane. He really steeps his film into film history. He brings a lot from German Expressionism into the film, and really shows here's the best artistry that all of these different film schools have made, and he combines them into something very fresh and very intriguing. They're both mysteries, as they're trying to figure out what's happened. They both have iconic actors. Obviously, it's Orson Welles, and then Jimmy Stewart.
Of course, Jimmy Stewart's a legend.
That's right. But after that, the similarities pretty much end. But if nothing else, I would say you have to watch Vertigo just so you can see how these two films, as they're now considered to be the two most influential films in the industry, complement and supplement each other, just because they're coming from very, very different areas and expertises.
Huh. Okay. All right. Interesting. I really would not have guessed that. I mean, truly.
Well, what would you recommend?
If I had to pick something, gosh, what about like Bull or Casablanca or Gone with the Wind? I mean, any of those. And I suppose the reason I say that is because a majority of the film magazines and film books and articles and whatever that I read, all those films are either right next to or right below Citizen Kane. So therefore, I feel like there are better choices than Vertigo.
But do you think that's just because, with the exception of Raging Bull, they're just closer together in chronological order?
See, now that is a good question, because it's interesting that every time, especially like AFI, do you follow AFI's top lists at all? Do you go check those out?
Yeah.
I feel like every 5 or 10 years, however often AFI does this, those movies that came out in the, 40s, 50s, 60s are all still up. I'm like, okay, there's got to be a movie that came out today that is in the top 10. There's got to be. Yet for some reason, year after year, decade after decade, we still have Citizen Kane at the top. And I'm like, okay, why? Well, okay, fine. I know why. It's because it probably moved cinema forward more dramatically, we'll say, than any other film has, I suppose. But why? There have been plenty of great movies that have come out in the last decade and 4 years.
Oh, yeah.
So why don't you think they've made the list? Because they haven't withstood the test of time?
Possibly. That we could definitely say that. But you take some of the really good movies that have come out now, and you just compare them to the other things on AFI's list. And in order to bump something off the list, you have to ask yourself, is this movie that just came out better than this movie that's already on the list? And once you have a movie institutionalized like that, it better be a really good movie that you're wanting to say, yeah, we can bump something off. Because it's just not putting something on the list, it's taking something else off of it. And that's just going to become harder and harder and harder to do.
Yeah, I guess that's true. No, fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, that you make a very valid point. I hadn't thought about that.
I do what I can.
All right. Well, let us know what you think. Do you think we should bump all these overrated 30s, 40s, and 50s movies and start putting on some new stuff? Or should we keep the classics? You tell us. All right. Well, all that joking aside, though, if you haven't seen Citizen Kane, you should definitely go check it out. It is been top 10 for, several decades now, and for a very good reason. It's got a lot of great stuff in it, so be sure to check it out if you haven't done so already. And until next time, you can follow us on social media, and as always, watch good movies.